On today's episode, we chat with Brian Cohn, who is a biomedical scientist, inventor, and consultant. He is the chief data scientist at Kaspect. In 2014, Brian earned his bachelor's degree at Pitzer College while also working on a team master's project with KGI students. To start off, Brian, can you introduce the company you're leading right now and what that involves?
Kaspect is a design firm for data science. It's a company that I made because I was working with a company during my team master's project, actually with KGI, and I noticed that there was a lack of artificial intelligence and machine learning strategy within large and small biopharmaceutical or health-related companies. Really, what was kind of frustrating for them is they hear the design leaders or the people within the company who are doing chief marketing or they're doing design and R&D. They have a responsibility to be ahead of their competition, and they always hear in the back of their head about machine learning is really important. They hear about data science being important. They're watching these companies like Google and Facebook rise out of absolutely nothing on the laurels of machine learning and of these incredible technologies. And yet they don't know how to really access that, and they don't have a creative backing in it. So what I realized is that if I could understand how businesses work and what they value within a business, as well as the algorithms and tools that could be used at their disposal, then I could connect the two and create a value proposition out of that. So Kaspect has always been about trying to connect companies with really strong artificial intelligence strategy, as well as implementing those solutions as a kind of a project base.
And I got to ask, how did you become interested in this? I know just looking at your background, Pitzer College alum, and obviously you got connected with KGI, but even before that, where did this interest begin?
So originally I started doing research in a biology lab, working on evolutionary biology. And working with some of the tools in that lab, we used something called R, which is a statistical programming language. And when you use a statistical programming language in one field, you're learning skills for hundreds of fields, because R is not, statistics are used across everything. So I would work on a small project and work on something like a robustness analysis. For example, I'd have one outcome. I'd say it looks very significant, but then I would go back to the input data, mess with it a little bit, add some noise, change it a little bit, and see if my result at the end of the pipeline was the same. That robustness analysis is used in pretty much every single industry. And so learning just in one field about statistics and learning about the core opportunities opened my mind to so many other opportunities outside of that. And that's what got me closer to data science and to artificial intelligence, is trying to solve real scientific problems using the tools from many different industries. In fact, one of the things that I found in my undergraduate was that when working with a retina is kind of spherical. And so I was able to use some topographic mapping algorithms that have been used for Cartesian mapping, things that people use to talk about mountainscapes or talk about the ellipsoid Earth. I was able to use that for an eye. And similarly, in my PhD research, as I moved to USC through the NSF Graduate Fellowship, they have you can create forces in all directions. And in order to visualize those forces in all directions, I actually superimpose a sphere around the end of a cat's foot. So you could see like kind of a heat map on a sphere of every force that a cat's foot could create. And then also kind of, if you remove a muscle, you can see exactly what forces are now impossible and which ones are still possible. So if you can bridge gaps between different fields, you can open up a lot of huge opportunities. And the same's happened with industry. I've worked with a couple biopharmaceutical companies, small biotech companies, even an automotive company. And I found that some of the techniques that I find in one area are easily applicable to another. It's just about access. They just don't know about those opportunities. And sometimes these companies have incredible ideas and they have incredible value propositions. They say, if we could just reduce this error right here by just 5%, we'd save a lot of money and make our customers a lot happier with us. And so they have the need, and a lot of times they have some ideas of what algorithms can be implemented, but they don't have the execution. And I think that's the kind of value proposition I'm focused on right now.
To go back to being connected to KGI through that Team Masters project, how do you feel that helped you long term as you entered your career? Obviously, the Team Masters Project, or TMP, is made up mostly of KGI's own graduate students, but you were one of the rare undergrad students coming from Pitzer to get that opportunity. So if you can speak on that.
Sure. So I was brought onto a Team Masters Project because I know how to code and I know how to build things, and working with Team Masters projects it's really natural to implement and design something too. And I knew that a lot of the teams were building actual things in reality, like sensors that check the temperature over time of packages or things like that. But in our project, working with Eli Lilly, we had to build some sort of customer sentiment analysis system. And we were working with a vendor within Lilly, and we're working within the Lilly design research team. And so working on that project was very much a challenge for us, because we had to actually work on real data with real people and make sure that we could create some understanding from the data that was available. In that particular project, what we were doing is we were looking at Twitter, and we're trying to identify if we could inspire new packaging approaches with pharmaceutical packaging by looking at people's complaints on Twitter of not only Lilly products, but also their competitors, and see, are people getting cut on the edge of these packages? Are people angry with blister packages? And try to understand what are the types of people who have those problems and why are they complaining. And so being able to extract those helpful knowledge tidbits from a bunch of people on Twitter is pretty challenging. And we actually had to use a pretty sophisticated machine learning model to do that.
As you kind of entered your current role and your current opportunities as a scientist, necessarily by trade, with all these different experiences, do you feel like the entrepreneurial side came easy to you, or how were you able to pick up that part of your skill set or career?
So KGI did have a big part in connecting me to the first element of entrepreneurial work. Specifically, when I started this Team Masters project, it really started a relationship between me and a couple of the people at Lilly. And even after the Team Masters project, I was able to talk to them and ask them for help. Everyone has cool ideas. It's great if you can take those cool ideas and bring them to someone who knows the industry, not to sell it to them, but because they've seen things start and finish, and they've seen things from inception to deployment. So being able to build a mentorship relationship through the TMP was really important for me, because then I could go to those mentors and say, hey, I have this interesting idea for something totally not biopharmaceutical, but I think you could give me a good direction. And sure enough, they would connect me to people. They would help me understand how I need to market things. And that's made it a lot easier for me. However, entrepreneurship is, of course, it's a really tough kind of thing to do, because it's a lot of question marks. In a lot of ways, you can think of entrepreneurship as a scientific enterprise, because you have a lot of questions and hypotheses about what people want, and you need to test every single hypothesis to make sure your product's going to work. So for instance, if you have an idea for a spectacular new project A, you have guesses on why it's important and why people value it. You might think that people value it because it looks cool, but other people might value it because it makes them look cool in front of someone else. So you never know if your hypotheses are right in an entrepreneurial situation. And so practicing that and meeting with just random people that I can find who are in that target audience has really improved my kind of social skills as well. Like, it's really hard to open yourself up and to be vulnerable with someone and say, hey, this is me, this is my idea. Is this something you would buy? Like, is this valuable to you? Do you think this is worth it? And to hear every answer along the spectrum, it's intimidating, but I think it's worth it. And I think it's powerful when you go through the process and you find something that works, and then you work with your customers who want you to continue making it.
For those that can't attend today's talk that you're giving here at KGI, what are one or two key takeaways that you would want to impart on the students?
So one of the sections in my presentation is about red flags in machine learning. And there are a couple points in there, but I'll mention the two main ones. So if you're a person at a bioscience-based company, biotech company, one of the red flags that you'll definitely see are models being prioritized over accuracy for a marketing approach. This is very common when you hear about companies that are like, we are the AI of insulin pumps. We use artificial intelligence everywhere, and we're using deep neural networks, and we use convolutional, deep neural networks. And so what's tricky is with actual science, your goal isn't to make the most complex model that's the most precise. Your goal is to make a model that meets the customer needs. So sometimes one person and their insulin pump, they may require one algorithm, and a completely different person requires a completely different algorithm. To give you a basic example, one of my studies is working with the human index finger and trying to reverse engineer how that works. And so we connect muscles with cables of cadaver hands. And so we pull on the tendons of these hands and we see what forces the fingertip can create. And with that, we have to model that relationship between input activations or input tensions on the muscles and the output forces. And sometimes that relationship is linear and sometimes it's not. I mean, it requires something more complex. But it's important to note that when you create something that's more complex, you sacrifice your simplicity. And so it's dangerous to do that sometimes because your model, when you get some patient who's a little bit different than everyone else, with a linear model, they would be like, the behavior of the model might be a little bit different. But with a nonlinear complex model, that the diabetic pump might be giving some really weird readings because it's nonlinear. It's harder to understand and harder to regulate as well. So I think that when you see marketing for our company does everything with neural networks, or our company is very, very AI, and you don't hear that little side note of, but we always check to make sure that linear is not out of the question, then just be aware that those companies might be a little bit less careful about medical data, and they might be a little bit more risky with their approaches. And similarly, when people don't understand how neural networks or how support vector machines or these complex models, how they're actually formed, it can be a marketing ploy. It's in a lot of ways, it's like looking at a car salesman and saying, oh, well, I mean, the paint job is useful for the visuals, but it doesn't actually make the car faster. And so it's important to look for that as a red flag. And the second red flag is what I call one-shot artificial intelligence or one-shot machine learning, which is where a company will hire a machine learning expert, not unlike myself, and they'll say, okay, we have this problem. We have this, we want to be able to detect like the top 10% of the people who are most likely to buy our product again if we poke them with an email. Okay, so you write up an algorithm that goes through all the customer data that you have. You predict something on it, and you get a decent. Seems to start working well, and then you just kind of bake that model directly into the code. So if you can imagine, it's like, like in Google. In Gmail, they actually have a spam filter, but they're updating that spam filter all the time. They have to because, people are crafty and they change their spam messages a little bit to the side here, a little bit to the side there, and they manipulate it so that the spam filters don't catch it, right? They'll use your name, or they'll put your address in it or something, or they'll put special letterhead on it, right? So that algorithm has to adapt and adjust. If Google made its algorithm for spam detection once, it would fail. Like after a couple of weeks. So the same thing occurs for biomedical devices and big pharmaceutical companies. They also need to do more than just one-shot machine learning. They have to continually update their models and really budget into their programs a recurring improvement of their models. So those are the two red flags. So choosing models over marketing and avoiding one-shot machine learning.
Well, thanks so much, Brian, for visiting KGI and continuing to develop all the opportunities and connections between your company, Kaspect, and our students. And you can follow Brian's progress and initiatives on kaspect.com. That's KASPECT.com. And we'll also link to his LinkedIn bio in the show notes. But thanks again, Brian, for coming on.